Welcome back to Daytimers. Peace be with you. We're on our second to last set of words from the resurrection. So today we have Peter's restoration at the end of John chapter 21. And then we have a couple more words combined together for next week from the end of Matthew and of Mark, kind of the two different sort of great commissionings to go out into the world. So we'll have that next week. And then there is a third week. There's one more Thursday in May. And I had put it on the schedule as just catching up, because sometimes we have to catch up, but we've been okay. This new format has actually meant that I'm not playing catch up with my plans. So we can certainly talk about what we might want to do in a couple of weeks, or and then also be thinking towards the summer. Sometimes we've taken a break over the summer. Sometimes we've had a guest teacher like Judy. And I think last couple of these summers, I feel like of recent years, I've gone until June or July because we were in the middle of something. But when we get to like mid-July through August, I'm pretty sparse. Like I'm at a couple camps and then vacation. So, unless someone else wants to teach it, I probably will have to bow out. Anyway, we'll get that all sorted out. All right. Well, those of us in the room just said our opening prayer. So you at home, you might have to press pause and pray for the Lord's wisdom, and then back we're at it. So today we have, like I said, Peter's restoration. It's this beautiful conversation over breakfast. Sometime following the resurrection, Jesus, he had already come to the lakeshore. He was not recognized at first glance, and then he tells them, hey, try fishing, put the nets down one more time. Lo and behold, there's all this fish. Peter puts on his clothes and jumps in the water and goes to Jesus, whom he now recognizes. And so then Jesus has a charcoal fire going, which is charcoal fire is the scene of the crime for Peter's denial of Jesus, previous weeks. And now we're at this conversation over breakfast with the risen Christ talking to Peter, and there are other disciples present. So that's part of it too. So I'll read, and then we'll come back through on our own. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. He was the one who had reclined next to Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who is it that is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me." So the rumor spread in the community that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?" And then there's just a brief concluding paragraph, sort of like the previous chapter, basically saying, "I'm the eyewitness of these things. There's so many other things that would fill all the books of the world if we wrote everything down that Jesus said and did." So take your time now back through it, and I'll find some background music here. So what is the word doing in this passage to you? Where does it take you?
Well, Peter denied Jesus 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think about this.
Mhm.
And, I think, if I remember correctly, when Peter got forgiveness, it was also feed my sheep.
Mhm.
I think Jesus was also telling them, don't feed my sheep,
Mhm.
or then tend to my sheep. I'm not sure. That's what the first part of this reminds me.
Mhm.
I guess it just reinforces that anything can be forgiven. I mean, if Jesus forgave Peter for denying him 3 times, and then reinforced his love for him 3 times. I think that, you know, just a good reminder that we can be forgiven.
And besides making an obvious connection, Jesus is like, it's kind of gracious to give Peter a full 3 repetition restoration. He could have just done it with 1. He was definitely bringing him back through it.
The last sentence was powerful to me because of my experience. And, we don't know the time or the place.
Mhm.
When I first started working heavy construction, I had a tremendous amount of tribulation.
Mhm.
Through a vision, Jesus just reminded me, no matter where I was or how things were going, he was with me.
Mhm.
Paved the way for me.
Mhm.
300 feet isn't a short distance to fall. You get
Yeah.
to think about things.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder what Peter thought when he heard this about when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. I was just wondering what he was thinking.
Physical therapy.
Yeah.
Maybe he was thinking, oh, I'm going to grow old. That's good news. But of course, growing old would be 40. So
Right.
yeah, what was he thinking?
I really like verse 20. The part of verse 20 that really is very touching is the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. He was the one who had reclined next to Jesus at supper. I just think that is so dear.
Mhm.
Pondering this passage this morning. I have a picture on my study table near my prayer chair, and my grandfather's picture is on it. And my grandfather was a sheep herder, as was my father, and he switched over to cattle. And my husband and I raised lambs and tended sheep for over 20 years, just a few. But so the words just echo in me, and what comes back to me in the first sentence, feed my lambs. is sitting on chore buckets through the night, waiting for ewes to drop their lambs because they're born so weak. So, and you just need such an orchestrated tending of not just the lamb, but typically the mother. And not that she would need help, but similar to the delivery of a human baby, that mother is in duress. And sheep especially have difficulties delivering often. I'm not sure why. But so it just comes back to me, the smells of the barn. And I have this wonderful picture I took the time of our sheep, Dot was her name, in labor. And on a bucket was my husband waiting. And over his shoulder was our donkey watching. And beside them was our cat. And we had, I mean, it was like this family event. And so I just keep thinking of tending of the lambs, and then the way we would have to tend Dot afterward. There's a wax that builds up in the bottom of those teats that if they don't release it, you need to slip it so that the milk will flow easily. And if you have a weak lamb delivered, they're not going to suck hard enough to get that wax out of there. And so there's a tending to that sheep that needs to happen in order for life to happen or to continue. And if we don't feed those sheep, those lambs die. And it's, I just, as I read this, that's the smells of the barn, the events of all of that. Family history just echoes and echoes in me that the task of feeding lambs, tending sheep, feeding sheep is the task of love. And that's really something to be called to. So I see it as, is there evidence that you love me? Because that's the evidence.
What strikes me is, says, if it is my will. Why would he say if? Use that terminology.
Any thoughts on that?
Huh?
Do you have any thoughts on that? Why?
No, it's not real. It, if it said,
Yeah.
this is my will. Yeah.
Well, Peter and Jesus are talking about John and not Peter. So Jesus tends to redirect everybody to what's happening right in front of him. Like when in Luke, I feel like I preached on it recently. In Luke, when the people ask him, why the blood of the Gentiles was mixed with the sacrifices by Pilate. And then Jesus is like, oh yeah, same with the tower that fell in Siloam. Why did that kill so many people? He's not going to answer sort of the question of if about that. He directs it right back to the person and says, unless you repent. And, here this is, Peter's curious about somebody else. Jesus is not going to tell him somebody else's story. He's going to leave it as a big if, because he's going to give Peter the if about everybody else, but when it comes to Peter, he's speaking directly, like, do you love me? Feed my sheep. At some point, the if questions become secondary to, well, what has God actually called you to do right now? Because we can spin around, we can wonder and deliberate and be curious all the time and be totally and that can be sort of like a willful distraction to what Jesus actually wants us to do in feeding sheep, right? He's given Peter his will already. My will is for you to feed my lambs, so don't worry so much about someone else's will. The other thing that's going on at this conclusion here, Jack, is that the gospel's trying to address, it's saying, therefore a rumor started that, the beloved disciple wouldn't die. it seems like a pretty good indicator that that caused some trouble in the early community, like that John was probably the last disciple to die. And so when he died, it's like, well, man, all the apostles are dead and Jesus isn't back yet. Like, what's going on next? You might remember the end of chapter 20. It sounds like a conclusion to the whole gospel. I mean, it's like, these things have been written so that, you know, you would believe and have life in his name, you know, and it already had mentioned, you know, there's many other things that Jesus did that are not written in this book. So chapter 20 feels like a conclusion, and then you get this chapter 21, which serves a couple purposes, but at least one of them is to sort of say it's not a scandal that the beloved disciple has died. We still have his testimony, and now perhaps Peter's perspective or Peter's testimony got tacked on to the end of John's gospel here, so that now we hear from this perspective of Peter about his restoration and about this conversation he had with Jesus about the beloved disciple, and Jesus wasn't going to answer that if question for him, and just to again allay the distress in the community that our beloved disciple is dead as well, and Jesus is still not back as promised.
Well, it sounds like he's almost admonishing it. He says,
Yeah.
Well, what business is that of yours?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yep.
As for me, that is exactly what it brought to mind. What difference does it make how I use someone else? I've asked you to.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. Comparison doesn't do anything for us.
Yeah. No. And
our faithfulness does.
Yeah, and that's underlined by the movement. Like Jesus and Peter are walking. It says, Jesus says, follow me. It doesn't say they're walking, but you know, after this he said, follow me. And then Jesus turned and saw. So he's kind of looking behind him, comparing, like you said. And then again, Jesus at the very end says, you know, follow me.
If that follow me, I know the punctuation is different. They didn't use the punctuation in English.
Mm-hmm.
But in 22, the context is an exclamation point.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently in the grammar, it was a command. But this one, 19, is not.
Yeah, I mean,
That echoes with what I did with this passage a couple weeks ago. Because to me, that final follow is a statement of this is your purpose. Your job, your calling is to follow. And then I went through it and looked at it really closely because I'm trying to figure out, my husband's about to turn 80. I'm trying to think,
Oh,
I'm
no.
thinking about that. I'm thinking about all of that.
Tough businesses.
And- Well, and so but here's what I see is all of life displayed here within that purpose. First step, and it comes from that statement lamb, develop your gifts. This is how you prove you love me, Peter. Develop your gifts. And that's what you're doing with your little children, is you're developing them, you're helping them develop. And then the next I see in the next 10, my sheep, that's where I see Tom's age, and I'm just passing out of, display those gifts, whether that's profession or work or whatever. And so I really mess with, what's this follow me, and how is this when you grow old fit? And I realize the task that I'm entering, because I'm in my late 60s, the task I'm entering is prepare to depart well.
mm-hmm.
Prepare to depart well. What does that mean? Well, how are you going to leave a legacy? What you're no longer developing those gifts. You're no longer displaying them in a public scenario the same way. And like, prepare to depart well. And that is kind of a distribution. It's, I've given stuff away and it's not all visible and I'm writing it down and it's not all, but that's where I saw it. I was like, oh yeah, here we have Jesus before his baptism, Jesus between his baptism and his crucifixion, and here he is ready to ascend. And what's he telling them? Depart well. I don't know, but that's what my mind does because I'm a teacher, and so it works that way. But that's what I hear of what you're saying is follow me. That's our life purpose.
Big overall umbrella.
Yep,
Mhm.
follow him in development, follow him in delivery, follow him in departure.
Well, to me, Simon Peter is the modern day, like modern day Christian. Makes all the stupid mistakes, asks dumb questions. And some Christians are know-it-alls. They got all the answers, and some don't have any answers. Looking for answers and doing stupid things, and their faith will be up one day and maybe someone else will take it way down. They're on a up and down kind of a ladder. Simon Peter is a good example of maybe what a modern day Christian would be like if he was Simon Peter. So Simon Peter is a good example in the Bible. That's what a disciple is. Sometimes asking stupid questions, so the modern day Christian asks questions of, see, do I really believe this? Or if they're confronted by somebody, they don't know how to answer them. Et cetera, et cetera.
Jed,
Oh, well, he shows weakness too. Weakness in belief, which modern day Christian goes through. Your belief isn't always strong, especially if you live long enough. So Simon Peter has a real place in the Bible for modern day Christians too.
you were 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when you shared the story about working with the homeless man, that came back to me while I was studying this. And it's been back to me several times. That's why I've been waiting for you to get back here. So I can tell you how much you encouraged me. Because what I watched you do was display your deep belief, and then you shared it with us, which is kind of handing off to us to this encouragement. And so Peter or not, I just saw that. I'm going, yeah. And you weren't really, I mean, you said, oh, you introduced it as I made a failure. And I'm going, that was no failure. I mean, it might have looked awkward to you, but to me, I went, that is how you display and how you depart well, is by telling your own story of the following.
But the mistake I made is I admonished him. I didn't encourage him to seek further, to look for something good instead of well, he was self-centered anyway at the time. If I look at it, but I could have left him in a better spot. That's where I feel. But like I say, if I took 10 people down there and 6 of them stayed, or 5 or 3 of them stayed, I still did something good. But that's all.
That's where I see the Peter in you. All the right things, even though you might not have looked like it.
So Jesus asked Peter first, do you love me more than these? What's the these?
What is that? No, my question to you. Yeah. that was
What or
the
who
one
are the
I-
these?
What are these? The
I mean, do you love me more than fish? Fish breakfast?
To me, it would have to be someone that was with them. Right then, because it said these right here. So,
Mhm. Interesting that then, if that's the case, which I think is the likeliest, I mean, I don't think maybe he's talking about fishing in his old life or something, but then Jesus is showing him that the best way to feed lambs and tend sheep is to love the shepherd more than sheep. Like that, your love of the great shepherd is going to be the strength and staying power of the tending of the sheep. If you're tending the sheep because the sheep love you back, you're going to be really ungrateful, and who appreciates, all that. But if you do it for love of the shepherd, then there you go.
So Peter's using the word love. Jesus is using the word love. Which love
Yeah.
are they using?
Yeah, no, that's a good thing to highlight. So some scholars will say that there's not as much difference between agape and phileo as we make of it. And some will say, well, there is a switch. So the first time Jesus asks Peter, do you agape me? And Peter says, yes, Lord, I phileo you. So agape is often, kind of this divine self-giving love. It's sort of the biggest love. Phileo is like city of Philadelphia. So it's like brotherly love. And then the second time Jesus says, do you agape me? And Peter says, yes, I phileo you. And then the third time Jesus says, do you phileo me? And Peter's hurt because the third time Jesus asked, do you phileo me? And he says, yes, Lord, you know everything. You know that I phileo you. So it doesn't clear everything up to know that, but it could seem that Jesus starts with do you agape me? Like, do you love me as I have loved you? And Peter's like, yeah, you're my brother. It's like, no, I wasn't asking if you're my brother. I'm asking, like, do you give everything for me? And then the third time Jesus takes it down a notch and says, he doesn't say the word even, but it's like, do you even phileo me? Do you phileo me? I mean, I guess you don't agape me, but do you phileo me? And now Peter, the third time is hurt by that.
That makes that next paragraph make good sense though in this context, because if you don't agape, you're not gonna make that hard walk.
Which is the love that's used in 20 when he talks about John?
Oh, that's going to be agape. I'll just double check it though. Let's see. Yeah, it's agape. Yeah.
Well, why is it, to me, when the disciples whom Jesus loved, well, didn't he love all of them? But it was his special one, and so whom Jesus loved.
Okay.
John always referred to him as this one.
Yeah, it's like John's self-reference in the Gospel of John, the one whom Jesus loved.
Because John's the writer of this.
Yeah. And I mean, it's in some ways it's like from the perspective of John, like, Jesus loves me the best. And from the perspective of Peter might say, I'm the beloved disciple. It's,
that's what I was thinking.
yeah.
Peter, in writing it, what he said,
Mm-hmm.
the disciple Jesus. He might say the one Jesus forgave.
Yeah. Well, and it's a very, kind of like Peter's being moved from, do you love me more than these? And then Peter's like, yeah. And then Jesus again, when Peter's curious about John, Jesus is like, it's sort of saying, do you love me more than these? Again, it's like, focus on me, keep following me. Don't worry about John. But to call yourself the one whom Jesus loved, from the outside looking in, that can seem like arrogant, special, privileged, egotistical. But from the inside, it is sort of like entirely bathed in, wow, my Jesus is mine and I am his. My beloved is mine and I am my beloved and my beloved is mine, Song of Songs. That from the inside, there's nothing better. And the beloved disciple, in calling himself that, is not saying, I'm loved more than these other disciples. But it's
it's pretty normal the way most people think. Say you belong to a group and you got a great leader. Okay. Well, everybody wants to be a friend of a great leader. Wants to be favored by him. It's the same with Simon Peter. I mean, every great leader has great followers, but not all of them. Some may doubt what his decisions are to do this or that, especially in war and stuff like that, where you're going into a dangerous situation. And of course, there's been instances in world wars or other wars where they made bad decisions that cost a lot of life too. Especially in Vietnam.
What do people think the word follow or follow me means?
He just gave the example of the cross. When he talked about spreading his arms, being that where you didn't want to go. Is he saying, follow me then to the cross?
So I've read this a lot of times as assignment to me. You follow me. I mean, it's so clearly, and
It's you and me.
yeah, I'm not walking toward the cross. So I'm going, what does that look like today? What's it look like next week? What's that look like? What do y'all, how do you guys see that? What do you call
Yeah, y'all,
it? Yeah, what do you,
y'all.
what does it look like in your life, Jim?
See, I've had this thing all the time, this relationship is personal. And when Philip said, show us the Father, he's hiding in the plural. Jesus looked at him and said, have I been with you so long, and yet you say, show us the Father? Now that's in the English, and in the original, Tom showed me that that's not the way it is, but I still think
It's
Jesus is
there,
trying to
okay.
push the personal and get away from the plural, because this is a personal relationship. And I think we should use the word y'all.
Mhm.
It would help if we use the plural you when we mean you all, and the singular you when we mean you. I could picture Jesus going up to Philip right there, you know, have I been with you so long, Philip? And yet you say, show us.
So that's my question. Thank you. It's not how are y'all following Jesus. It's how are you
Yeah.
following
Yeah.
Jesus?
Who do you say
And
that I
think
am?
he's dealing with Peter that way too.
Yeah, but I,
Peter wants to make a comparison, and Jesus is talking, you, Peter, you, Peter. Here's another thing in here too. Can I move
Keep
to another
going.
thing?
Yeah.
Okay. He said to him the third time, Peter's all upset about it. Said something. He's upset about that. In preparation for what we did, I was reading a book, and it's called what's the name of the book?
someone who measured it.
No. It's about culture. And the author was born to missionary parents in the Middle East. And now she's a consultant to Fortune 500 and international companies and governments, because she speaks 4 or 5 different languages, and she's lived in many, many countries. And she starts the book by telling a story of working with in her office. She's working with some people, and she takes 2 women with her on an international trip. One is from Lebanon, one is from the States. Familiar, foreign to familiar. It's a little book that thick, and it is so powerful, talking about how to get along with other cultures. And the woman sitting on the aisle, she's sitting between the 2 colleagues. Woman said to him, tell me what it's like to live in Lebanon. She makes questions like that. And she says, well, what's it like living in America? That was, she just came back with a retort like that. And the woman says, no, really, what is it like? I mean, what do you have to get used to? And she answers by saying, well, you know, if someone offers you a cup of tea, you refuse it. And then they will come back a second time and offer you a cup of tea, and you will refuse it. And then they will come a third time and offer you a cup of tea, and you will accept it and say thank you. But it's normal to go through this 3-time process and politely refuse each time. So it doesn't look like you're grabbing at everything that's offered to you. And the woman sitting next to the window, the woman from Lebanon, says, oh, that's why. And she turned to this other colleague from Lutheran and she says, I don't understand. What was it? She said, that's why I don't have any friends in America. She said, lunchtime comes and I say, hey, Paulina, you want to go to lunch? No. And I said, okay.
Oh,
And they leave. And after 2.5 years, she had no friends at work. And so this word third coming up out of this culture, it hit me that I don't know if Jesus or Peter is playing with it, but it's normal in that culture. And we had it in China too. We have a Lebanese relative, and it's a big thing in our family because she's married to a German descendant. And, you know, and the title of this book, Foreign Familiar, shows you that things aren't east or west. She's divided all populations in the world from her experience into warm climate, cold climate. And she said 2 cultures, but 3 cultures, Russian, Chinese, and American, have both warm climate and cold climate. But all other cultures, you go to South America and a conversation will go on and on and on. And maybe after 2 or 3 hours, after sitting down and having something to eat and drink, and then you'll start to get to what are you going to do? Or if you're going to a wedding, the wedding is supposed to start at 2. People stop work at 2 and start to get ready to go to the wedding. Even the people who are cooking for the wedding don't start cooking until after 2.
Same thing.
And it's that way in Africa too, yeah. Warm climate, cold
Almost that way
climate.
in Hawaii.
She said,
it's warm climate.
you don't meet somebody on the street in Finland and spend 3 hours before you get to the heart of the meeting right away. It's too cold to stand around. And so she's divided everything into these 2 climates. But the warm climate, three offers, is very common. And it gets a little testy for people who haven't had that. But you have to get used to it.
Oh, that's fun. Thanks for sharing that.
It's very interesting.
You know,
Still,
earlier, Jerry, you mentioned the exclamation point the second time he says "follow me," and that there isn't the grammar in the Greek. There is one difference, and I'm not up on my grammar to really tell you, but the first time Jesus says "follow me," he says the word order is "follow me," akaluthe moi, follow me. The second time he reverses it, so he's like "me follow." You know, so the first time is "follow me," the first time "me follow." I don't know if that's significant. If the emphasis being switched around is Jesus subtly again saying, when I said follow me, I meant me follow.
Yeah, it's
Not
making
this.
that personal thing though.
Yeah.
Again.
Tom, is there a difference? The first time Jesus says, feed my lambs.
Oh yeah.
The second time it says, tend my sheep. And then the sheep come back again. What's the difference between feeding? Is there a difference there between the feeding and the lambs being the little ones, the young ones, the new ones?
Yeah, they are 2
And
different
then
words.
tending or shepherding my sheep, the more mature, keeping them in line and going over the cliff.
Yeah, the word for tend is basically the same word for sheep. It's shepherd my sheep. Yeah, and then the first one is like feed my lambs, it's like young sheep, young lambs. So there could be that progression that Mary was pointing out about kind of the using your gifts, developing your gifts, showing your gifts, but also the audience as well. Feed lambs. I mean, Abel just turned 1 on Tuesday, and his doctor's like, okay, you can switch him to whole milk, but not too much because he needs to be hungry for solid foods. And it's like the whole job this year was to just feed him, just keep feeding him bottles. It's very simple. You can't do much tending. You can redirect him if he's in a dangerous situation, but you're not going to do a lot of life lessons. You're just feeding him. And then as he gets older and more verbal, then you can start to tend him a little bit more.
I mess with those words quite a bit. But with the first one I did the 3 Ds because that's the teacher thing. But I thought it meant help or assist.
Mhm,
And then I moved to direct or instruct.
mhm,
And finally I went to, what does it mean to prepare to die? And
mhm,
I know it's prepare, but it's also influence. And it
Mhm.
depends on whether you're helping, assisting someone else to die.
sure.
Because that's why I'm studying this, is I'm doing a lot of grief work for
Mhm,
some deaths that have already happened, but I also have some folks who are moving towards death. And so I was trying to understand what is the instruction,
mhm,
or how do you help somebody turn 80, prepare to die? How do you help somebody prepare? Or what is the other side of that?
mhm.
How do I prepare myself for something?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Mhm.
or deal with the
Survivor.
grief.
How do you-
Yeah, and
the
that's what I
survivor-
want. That's what I
Survivor ministry.
Well, how do you prepare for a circumstance that means the loss of control? So how do you prepare for something you can't prepare for? Like
Yeah.
when, you know,
Giving up, giving up, giving up.
And
Yeah.
that's the whole aging process, is
Mhm.
releasing, just like developing is to
mhm,
take on, then you release. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just what he told Peter.
I know when my brother was dying, he wanted to come to Oregon for a doctor-assisted suicide. It wasn't going well for him. And what are you doing to the rest of your family? They need to see how life is lived. Can't quit just before the end. Whether or not he took my advice or not, or just circumstance.
It
I
seems
keep
like
hearing
kind
in
of-
my head, never give up.
It seems kind of strange that 18 is thrown in there like that. And Jesus was abruptly, I mean, go from breakfast and get up and walk, he's talking about sheep. Then he starts talking about putting your clothes on and tightening your belts and
mhm.
people leading you where you don't want to go as an old person.
Right.
And then John interprets that as indicating what kind of death he's going to be.
Sure.
It's just, to me, it just seems like in geology, we call it an inclusion.
Mhm.
It's something that's stuck in there that doesn't belong there with everything else.
And see, to me, it wouldn't be complete without it.
Okay.
Because it leads us back to, there's a reason for loving and loving and loving, and it is your purpose, and your purpose is to follow me, and you follow me clear to the end, Peter. I mean, I've called you to love, and to love when you grow old,
That reminds me of a quote. I don't know if it's dying or death, but it is love is the allocation of our dying. And so that knowledge of death, however far off you may or may not think it's likely to be, that your love is, it's not like, oh, I love in the meantime, but it's like my mortality, my limitation, like when I love now, this is me like kind of handing out my death to others. Like I'm giving up of myself for the sake of someone else, or I'm spending my life for someone else. And so it's not, love and then death, but it is love is the form that, sort of taking your knowledge of your mortality. Like I'm not gonna be around forever. So with that knowledge clearly in your sights, then you spend it in love, as opposed to, alternatives, which is to deny death, to live as if you're going to be here forever and things will never change.
When you're using the word knowledge, and Peter kept coming back, you know. My understanding is that this word is like Adam knew Eve.
Mm.
It's that kind of intimate, personal,
And,
closer than anybody else on this planet. No, you know.
mhm.
And
it's a beloved term.
it isn't a head knowledge, it's an intimate, very personal, intimate.
I've been taking a class called The Art of Dying Well. and they have to do some exercises. There to practice.
Die well, die healthy.
No, not healthy. To depart well.
Mhm.
And it's been most intriguing because they do it for both purposes. To either reframe a death that has already happened, or to prepare for your own death, or to assist someone else in preparing. And so there's just exercises they have to do, and they're kind of mental exercises. But, and I've only been working on it about 2 weeks, but it has surprised me how, this can sound so goofy, but how you can almost, for me, I can almost see how it really is a crossing over, not an ending. And so once you have a crossover that you've designed in your head, or you imagine for somebody else, or you've reframed into, it really is this, oh, well, then the task is to depart well. Because if you depart well, people are left looking up. I mean, think about it, really think about it. When we think of Jesus's departure, it's not people staring at their feet going, oh, that was horrible, horrible. It is this, his departure was his actual death. He died to them. He was no longer present. And that is the art of dying well. Does that make any sense to anyone?
It
Anyway,
makes me uncomfortable.
I appreciate hearing that.
Sorry, and I'm being real honest, but,
Yeah, you are. And I love that about you. I love that.
and I, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
You know, I think, since I'm still on the sunny side of 90, think about, say I might live 3 more years.
Yeah.
So what do I want to accomplish or do in the last 3 years of my life? Actually, we should be thinking about that when we're 40
Mhm.
or 30 instead of 90. But it's human nature to kind of think that way, I guess. It's when you make out your will, you start thinking about stuff like that. How are you going to leave people? How are you going to see people looking at you, at your life, or at your last? What really counts is the last breath of life. It's what people see. So leave them without any doubt what you believe. I guess. I wrote something down there. I don't know why. If I lost my sight, would I still find myself? Well, you got, so you have the senses of touch, smell, sound. Can't see somebody making music, but you can hear them. So I would rather lose my sight than my hearing. That's for sure.
We're at time. Yeah, great conversations, insights. Thank you so much for all this. We'll be back at it next week with the end of Matthew and Mark.
We didn't even encourage these words in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he said, it's my will.
Yeah.